Daniel Cooper sat in the cramped transport pod as it descended through the lower levels of Viridian Station. The metallic walls hummed around him, and the air grew colder with each passing moment. He clutched a data tablet against his chest, watching the level numbers tick downward on the display screen. Level 43, level 45. Nobody came down this far anymore. The pod jerked to a stop at level 52, and the doors slid open with a hiss that echoed through the empty corridor. Daniel stepped out onto the metal grating, his footsteps clanging in the silence. The lights overhead flickered weakly, casting long shadows across walls that hadn't seen maintenance in years. Rust crept along the corners like slow-moving vines. Ambassador Zrel had given him this assignment 3 days ago. The insectoid diplomat had clicked his mandibles, and what Daniel had learned was amusement. "Catalog the forgotten prisoners," Zrel had said, his compound eyes glittering. "The Council requires updated records, a perfect task for our newest human representative." The other diplomats had laughed. Daniel was the lowest-ranking member of Earth's delegation to the Galactic Council, assigned to duties nobody else wanted: filing reports, organizing archives, and now apparently counting prisoners that the galaxy had chosen to forget. He walked down the corridor, checking cell numbers against his tablet. Most of the cells were empty, their energy barriers deactivated long ago. A few contained beings who barely moved, their eyes dull and unfocused. Daniel made notes about each one, his heart growing heavier with every step. These weren't just prisoners. They were living beings that the Council had simply stopped thinking about. At the end of the corridor, Daniel found cell 52J. The energy barrier still glowed faintly, a pale blue shimmer across the entrance. He stopped and looked inside. His breath caught in his throat. The creature was massive. It filled nearly the entire cell, its body curled around itself like a sleeping cat. But this was no cat. Scales covered its form, each one as large as Daniel's hand. They were a deep gray color, dull and lifeless, like stone that had never seen sunlight. 2 enormous wings lay folded against its sides, the membranes torn and tattered. A long tail curved around the body, the tip barely twitching. The head was reptilian, with a snout full of teeth and 2 horns that curved backward from its skull. A dragon, or something very much like the dragons from Earth's old stories. Daniel checked his tablet. The entry was brief, written in the clipped language of bureaucracy. Prisoner designation, Kraventhar. Species Saurian. Crime refusal of direct council order. Sentence, indefinite containment. Last inspection, 97 years ago. 97 years. Daniel read the date again to make sure. Nobody had checked on this creature in nearly a century. He stepped closer to the energy barrier. The dragon didn't move. Its chest rose and fell slowly, so slowly that Daniel had to watch for a full minute to be sure it was breathing at all. The eyes were closed, the lids thick and heavy. "Hello?" Daniel said softly. Nothing. No response. Not even a flicker of awareness. Daniel glanced down the corridor. He was alone. He should just make his notes and move on. That's what anyone else would do. That's what the council expected. Instead, he sat down on the cold metal floor, his back against the wall opposite the cell. He placed his tablet beside him and looked at the dragon. "My name is Daniel," he said. "Daniel Cooper. I'm from Earth. That's a planet pretty far from here. We only joined the council 15 years ago, so we're still pretty new to all this." The dragon didn't move. Daniel continued anyway. "I'm supposed to be cataloging prisoners down here, updating records. Nobody's been down to this level in a long time, apparently." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "I'm sorry about that. I'm sorry nobody checked on you." The silence pressed in around him. The only sound was the faint hum of the energy barrier and the distant rumble of the station's engines. Daniel stood up, brushed off his pants, and picked up his tablet. He made his notes about prisoner Kraventhar, marking the creature as alive but unresponsive, and he walked back to the transport pod and returned to the upper levels. That night, lying in his small quarters, Daniel couldn't sleep. He kept thinking about those dull gray scales, those tattered wings, that barely breathing form. He thought about 97 years of silence, 97 years of being forgotten. The next morning, after his regular duties were complete, Daniel returned to level 52. He found cell 52J and sat down in the same spot against the wall. The dragon looked exactly the same, as if it hadn't moved at all. "I'm back," Daniel said. "I hope you don't mind. I thought maybe you could use some company." No response. Daniel pulled out a book from his bag, one of the old paper ones from Earth. "I brought something to read. It's a story from my world about a man who went on a long journey. I thought maybe I could read it out loud. Even if you can't hear me or don't want to, at least someone will be here. You won't be alone. He opened the book and began to read. His voice echoed softly in the empty corridor, filling the silence with words and stories from a distant blue planet. The dragon remained still, locked in whatever darkness had claimed it. But Daniel kept reading, and when he finished a chapter, he promised to come back tomorrow. He had no idea if the creature could hear him. He had no idea if it even cared. But something deep in Daniel's heart told him that nobody, no matter what they had done, deserved to be this forgotten. 2 weeks passed, and Daniel visited Cell 52J every single day. Sometimes he read from his books. Other times he just talked, sharing stories about Earth, about his childhood in Colorado, about the mountains and rivers and the way snow looked when it covered everything in white. He told Kraventhar about his family, his friends, the reasons he had joined the diplomatic corps. The dragon never responded, never moved beyond that slow, barely visible breathing. Other council members began to notice Daniel's routine. In the cafeteria on the main diplomatic level, Ambassador Gel approached Daniel's table with 2 other representatives. The insectoid clicked his mandibles in amusement. "Still visiting the dead beast, human?" Drell asked, loud enough for others to hear. Several nearby diplomats turned to listen. Daniel set down his fork calmly. "Kraventhar isn't dead." "He's alive? Alive?" A reptilian ambassador named Cheeks hissed with laughter. "That creature stopped living long before its body forgot to die. You waste your time." "Maybe," Daniel said quietly, "but it's my time to waste." Drell leaned closer, his antennae twitching. "You humans are sentimental fools. This is why your species will never hold real power in the council. You care too much about things that don't matter." Daniel met the insectoid's compound eyes without flinching. "Maybe that's exactly why we should have power. Because we remember that living beings matter." The ambassadors laughed and walked away, but Daniel noticed one representative who didn't join in the mockery. A female amphibious being named Zira, her skin a pale blue-green, watched Daniel with thoughtful golden eyes. She nodded slightly before turning back to her meal. That evening, Daniel did something he should have done from the beginning. He accessed the station's historical archives, searching for information about the Saurians. What he found made his hands tremble. The Saurians had been legendary. 3,000 years ago, they were the Council's peacekeepers, revered across the galaxy for their wisdom, their strength, and their unwavering sense of justice. They didn't just enforce laws. They protected the weak, mediated conflicts, and stood as guardians for species that couldn't defend themselves. The records showed images of Saurians in their prime, scales gleaming like polished metal, wings spread wide, eyes burning with inner fire. But 600 years ago, something changed. The Saurian population began to decline. The records became vague, filled with bureaucratic language that said much while revealing nothing. Daniel dug deeper, requesting classified files that technically required higher clearance than he had. The truth, when he found it, was buried in a single report marked for deletion. Kraventhar had been a senior peacekeeper, one of the last of his kind. The Council had ordered him to destroy a fleet of refugee ships that were crossing into Council space without permission. The ships carried thousands of beings from species the Council considered lesser and unevolved. The Council deemed them a security risk and ordered their elimination. Kraventhar had refused. He had escorted the refugee fleet to safety instead, openly defying the Council's direct order. For this, they imprisoned him. And then, slowly, systematically, they erased the Saurians from galactic memory. Other Saurians who protested were silenced. Within 2 generations, the proud peacekeepers were gone, replaced by automated enforcement systems and Council military forces that followed orders without question. Daniel sat back in his chair, his heart pounding. Kraventhar wasn't a criminal. He was a hero who had been punished for having a conscience. The next morning, Daniel requested an audience with the Council Oversight Committee. He was denied. He requested again, denied. On his 3rd attempt, he went directly to the main council chamber and stood in the public petition area, refusing to leave until someone heard him. Ambassador Jarrell finally emerged, irritation clear in every movement. "What is it, human?" "I want to speak about prisoner Kraventhar," Daniel said firmly. "I've reviewed his case. His imprisonment was unjust." "The matter was settled centuries ago," Jarrell replied dismissively. "It was never settled. It was buried. There's a difference." Daniel held up his tablet, showing the reports he'd found. Kraventhar saved thousands of lives. He was punished for refusing to commit murder. Jarrell's mandibles clacked sharply. He disobeyed a direct council order. "The law is clear." "Even when the law is wrong?" Daniel challenged. "Especially then," Jarrell said coldly. "Order must be maintained. Now leave, before I have you removed from this station entirely." Daniel returned to level 52 with anger burning in his chest. He sat down hard against the wall, breathing heavily. The dragon remained motionless inside the cell. "They won't even listen," Daniel said to the silent creature. "They won't admit what they did to you was wrong." He laughed bitterly. "And here I am, talking to someone who can't hear me, can't respond, probably doesn't even know I exist." He put his head in his hands, exhausted and frustrated. The silence stretched on. And then, for the first time in 2 weeks, something changed. A sound. Low and deep, like stones grinding together, like the earth itself learning to speak. One word, rough and broken from centuries of disuse. "Why?" Daniel's head snapped up. The dragon's eyes were open, just barely. Thin slits of amber light in that massive gray face. Those eyes focused on Daniel with an intensity that made his breath catch. "Why?" Kraventhar asked again, his voice like distant thunder. "Why do you come here? Why do you speak to me?" Daniel's mouth opened, but for a moment no words came out. His heart hammered in his chest. Finally he found his voice. "Because nobody should be forgotten," Daniel said simply. "Nobody should be alone, not even you." The amber eyes stared at him for a long moment. Then, slowly, they closed again. But Daniel saw something he hadn't seen before. A single tear, thick and dark, rolled down the dragon's scaled cheek and fell to the floor with a soft splash. Daniel returned the next day with his heart racing. He didn't know if Kraventhar would speak again or if that single word had been all the dragon had left to give. He sat down in his usual spot and waited. For 10 minutes there was only silence. Then the amber eyes opened again, wider this time, and the massive head shifted slightly toward Daniel. "You asked why they imprisoned me," Kraventhar said, his voice still rough but stronger than before. "You found the records." "Yes," Daniel admitted. "I know what happened. I know what they ordered you to do." The dragon made a sound that might have been a laugh, but it held no humor. "I was their weapon for 1,000 years. I enforced their laws, fought their battles, kept their peace. And when I finally refused to be a weapon anymore, when I chose mercy over murder, they made me their forgotten shame." Kraventhar's eyes dimmed slightly. "Do you know what the worst part is, human? It didn't matter. I saved those refugees, yes. I escorted them to safety. But the Council still thrived. They found other ways to enforce their will, other weapons that wouldn't question orders. My sacrifice changed nothing. The galaxy moved on without me, and I rotted here in the dark." Daniel leaned forward. "That's not true. Those refugees you saved, they survived because of you. They had children. Those children had children. You didn't just save lives that day. You saved generations. Generations that forgot I existed," Kraventhar replied bitterly. "Maybe," Daniel said, "but they still exist. That matters." The dragon was quiet for a long moment. "Why does it matter to you, human? You didn't know me. You owe me nothing. Your species wasn't even among those I saved." Daniel thought carefully about his answer. "My planet has a dark history, too. We've done terrible things to each other. Wars, slavery, genocide. We've built empires on the suffering of others." He met Kraventhar's gaze steadily. "But we also learned something. We're not defined by our worst moments. We're defined by whether we choose to be better." "Pretty words," Kraventhar said, but there was less venom in his voice. "Maybe, but they're true words." Daniel pulled out his tablet. "I want to show you something. But first, I need to ask you a question. When you saved those refugees, did you do it because you thought it would change everything? Or did you do it because it was right?" Kraventhar's eyes narrowed. "I did it because I couldn't live with myself if I didn't, because being a weapon, being a tool, being something that follows evil orders, that isn't living. That's just existing." "Exactly," Daniel said softly. "You already knew what mattered. You just forgot." Over the following days, Daniel made a decision that could cost him everything. He smuggled in a modified data tablet, one that could bypass the cell's security restrictions. It was illegal. If caught, he would be expelled from the diplomatic corps and probably imprisoned himself. He didn't care. Late one night, when the corridors were empty, Daniel activated the tablet and pushed it through a small maintenance gap in the energy barrier. It clattered across the floor and stopped near Kraventhar's front claws. "What is this?" the dragon asked, eyeing it suspiciously. "Information," Daniel said. "Current galactic events, news feeds, records. Everything that's happened in the galaxy while you've been down here." He paused. "Including what happened to the species you saved." Craventhar stared at the tablet for a long time. Then, slowly, one massive claw reached out and touched the screen. It flickered to life, displaying images and text. Daniel left him alone that night, giving the dragon privacy to explore the information. He didn't know if it would help or hurt. He didn't know if showing Craventhar the galaxy that had forgotten him was cruel or kind. The next evening, when Daniel returned, he found Craventhar sitting upright for the first time. The dragon's posture had changed. His head was lifted, his wings slightly unfurled, and most striking of all, a faint glow pulsed beneath his scales, like embers buried in ash. "Valorians," Craventhar said, as soon as Daniel entered. "One of the species I saved. They now have 12 colony worlds. They're members of the council. They have art, music, literature." His voice cracked with emotion. "They have children playing in parks. I saw images of their children." Daniel smiled. "They exist because you existed. The Mytharians," Craventhar continued, his voice growing stronger. "They developed a cure for the Crimson Plague that saved billions across the galaxy. The Talth, they're peacekeepers now, doing what I once did. The Narathi, they built the gardens on Station Omega-7 that provide food for 6 systems." The glow beneath Craventhar's scales grew brighter, shifting from dim red to warm orange. It wasn't just light, it was life, returning to a body that had forgotten what life meant. "All of them," Craventhar whispered. "All of them are thriving. I thought my choice meant nothing. I thought I failed." "You didn't fail," Daniel said firmly. "You just weren't there to see what you built." Craventhar looked at Daniel, and for the first time those amber eyes burned with something besides pain. They burned with purpose. I forgot," the dragon said quietly. "I forgot what it felt like to care. To have a reason to wake up each day. I forgot what I was before they made me a weapon. I was a protector, a guardian. That was who I was meant to be." The glow spread across his entire body now, scales shifting from dull gray to bronze to gold. His wings stretched wider, the tattered membranes somehow looking less broken, the cell filled with warm light. "Human," Craventhar said, and his voice resonated with power that had been sleeping for 2 centuries. "You awakened something in me, something I thought was dead." "What's that?" Daniel asked. "Hope." The change in Craventhar didn't go unnoticed. Within 3 days, station security reported unusual energy readings from level 52. The Council's monitoring systems detected the bioluminescent glow, the increased heat signature, the signs of a creature waking from a very long sleep. Ambassador Jrel summoned Daniel to his office. The insectoid stood behind his desk, antennae quivering with anger. "What have you done?" Jrel demanded. The prisoner was stable, contained, harmless. "Now our sensors show he's becoming active again. You will cease all contact immediately." "No," Daniel said simply. Zeral's mandibles clicked rapidly. "That was not a request, human. It was an order. You are forbidden from entering level 52. Security codes have been changed. You no longer have access." Daniel felt his jaw tighten, but he kept his voice level. "On what legal grounds?" Craventhar was never given a fair trial. The charges against him were fabricated to hide the Council's own crimes. "I've documented everything. The matter was settled long ago," Jrel hissed. "Then settle it again. Properly this time." Daniel pulled out his tablet. "I filed a formal petition for case review. You can't legally prevent me from visiting him until that review is complete. I checked the regulations." Jrel leaned forward, his compound eyes glittering dangerously. "You're making a mistake, human. A career-ending mistake." "Maybe," Daniel replied, "but it's the right mistake to make." As Daniel left the office, he nearly collided with Ambassador Zira in the corridor. The amphibious woman caught his arm gently, her webbed fingers cool against his skin. "Walk with me," she said quietly. They moved to an observation deck overlooking the planet below. Zira glanced around to ensure they were alone before speaking. "I've been on the Council for 30 years, she said softly. "I've watched it become something I no longer recognize. What they did to the Saurians, what they did to Craventhar, it's our greatest shame. But nobody talks about it. Nobody wants to remember." "Why are you telling me this?" Daniel asked. Zira handed him a data chip. "Legal precedents. Cases where imprisoned individuals were granted rights to communication, to appeals, to basic dignity. If you're going to fight this, you'll need ammunition. Use these." Daniel looked at the chip, then at Zira. "Why help me? You could lose your position." "Because someone needs to," Zira said simply. "And because that dragon deserves better than what we gave him." Daniel continued his visits using the legal precedents Zira provided. The council couldn't stop him, not without openly admitting they wanted to keep Kraventhar isolated. Each day, the dragon grew stronger. His scales gleamed like polished bronze now. His wings, though still scarred, held themselves with dignity. The light within him burned steady and warm. They talked for hours. Kraventhar told stories of the old days, of mediating peace between warring species, of standing between the strong and the weak. Daniel shared more about humanity, about Earth's struggles toward justice, about the long and painful process of becoming better. "Your species is young," Kraventhar observed one day. "Only 15 years in the council. Yet you understand things that ancient species have forgotten." "We made a lot of mistakes getting here," Daniel said. "Maybe that's why we recognize them when we see them. It was on the 14th day of Kraventhar's awakening that everything changed." Alarms blared throughout the station. Emergency protocols activated. Daniel was in his quarters when his communicator buzzed urgently. He accessed the station-wide channel and heard the crisis unfolding. A ship had entered the system, its automated distress beacon screaming for help. The vessel carried 3,000 passengers, all infected with a biological plague. The ship's navigation was failing. Its trajectory would bring it dangerously close to Viridian Station within 6 hours. Daniel rushed to the council chamber, where representatives argued frantically. Through the viewing screens, he could see the ship tumbling slowly through space, its hull scarred and breached in places. "We must destroy it," Jarrell insisted. "The plague could contaminate the entire station." "We can't just kill 3,000 beings," another ambassador protested. "Quarantine protocols are clear," Keeks added. "The risk is too great. Destroying the ship is the only safe option." The debate continued, going in circles. Hours passed, and the ship drew closer. Nobody could agree on what to do. Nobody wanted to take responsibility for either choice. Daniel slipped away from the chamber and ran toward the transport pods. He overrode his security lockout using one of Zira's codes and descended to level 52. He sprinted down the corridor to Kraventhar's cell. The dragon was already standing, his full height making him seem even more massive. His eyes burned bright, and he was listening to something. Daniel realized Kraventhar had been accessing the station's communication feeds through the tablet. "I know," Kraventhar said before Daniel could speak. "I heard everything. That ship, those people, I know their signatures. They're Valorian, descendants of the ones I saved 200 years ago. The council can't decide what to do?" Daniel said urgently. "They're going to let bureaucracy kill 3,000 people." Kraventhar's scales blazed with golden light. "I remember now. I remember what I was. What I am. Not a weapon to be used or discarded. A protector. A guardian?" He looked at Daniel. "I need you to trust me. Can you do that?" "Yes," Daniel said without hesitation. "Then stand back." Kraventhar closed his eyes. The light within him grew brighter, hotter, building like a star being born. And then, with a sound like thunder breaking, he unleashed his power. The energy barrier shattered. The cell walls cracked. The ancient dragon spread his wings wide and roared, a sound that shook the entire station. After 2 centuries of silence, Kraventhar was free, and he was flying toward the plague ship. The council chamber erupted into chaos as alarms screamed throughout the station. Security feeds showed Kraventhar bursting through the lower levels, his massive form moving with impossible speed. Within seconds, he had breached the station's outer hull and launched himself into open space. Ambassador Jarrell's voice crackled over every speaker. "Security breach. The Saurian prisoner has escaped. All military units respond immediately." Daniel ran back to the council chamber, pushing past panicking diplomats. He reached the main viewing screen just as Kraventhar's form came into focus against the backdrop of stars. The dragon flew through the vacuum of space, his wings spread wide, his body glowing like a small sun. He moved toward the tumbling plague ship with purpose and grace. "Going to attack it," Chick shouted. "The creature has gone mad." "Shoot him down." "No," Daniel yelled, moving to the center of the chamber. "He's not attacking. He's saving them. Just watch." Ambassador Zira stood beside Daniel, her golden eyes fixed on the screen. Other council members crowded around, some terrified, others curious. They watched as Kraventhar reached the plague ship. The dragon didn't destroy it. Instead, he wrapped his massive claws around the damaged vessel, steadying its tumbling motion. Then something extraordinary happened. The golden light within Kraventhar grew brighter, spreading from his body to engulf the entire ship. The light pulsed and flowed, moving across the hull like liquid fire. "What is he doing?" someone whispered. Daniel remembered the old records he'd read about Saurians. The fire isn't destructive, it's purifying. It's part of their biology. They were peacekeepers and healers both. He's neutralizing the plague. For 10 minutes, the council watched in complete silence. Craventhar held the ship gently, his light washing over every surface, seeping through breaches in the hull, reaching the people inside. The plague ship's distress beacon changed its signal, no longer screaming danger, but broadcasting medical data. The readings showed the biological contamination dropping rapidly. 90%, 70%, 50%, 20%. 0. Craventhar carefully adjusted his grip and began guiding the ship toward the station's emergency docking bay. His movements were precise and controlled, showing a mastery of his power that spoke of centuries of experience. He was doing what he had been born to do, what he had always been meant to do. As the ship approached the docking bay, Craventhar gently released it and flew alongside, ensuring it landed safely. The moment the ship touched down, he landed beside it with surprising lightness for something so massive. The council members rushed from the chamber toward the docking bay. Daniel ran with them, his heart pounding. When they arrived, they found Craventhar standing beside the ship as its doors opened. Valorian refugees emerged slowly, blinking in confusion and wonder. They were weak but alive. Every trace of the plague burned away by the dragon's fire. A Valorian female, her blue skin marked with age, stepped forward. She looked up at Craventhar with wide eyes that filled with tears. "You," she whispered in a trembling voice. "I know you. My grandmother told stories. Stories of the great protector with golden fire who saved our ancestors from darkness. She said you were a legend, a myth." Craventhar lowered his massive head to look at her gently. "I was real. I am real, and so are you, because someone chose mercy over convenience 200 years ago. More Valorians emerged from the ship, 3,000 in total." They gathered around Craventhar, some crying, some reaching out to touch his scales with reverent hands. Children who had been sick moments before now laughed and played, their energy restored. Daniel turned to look at the council members who had followed. What he saw shocked him. Ambassador Jurel stood frozen, his antennae drooping. Cheeks had collapsed to his knees. And across the faces of a dozen different species, Daniel saw the same expression. Tears. They were crying. These ancient, powerful beings who had ruled the galaxy for millennia were weeping openly, not from fear or anger, but from something deeper. Shame. Recognition. Understanding. Ambassador Zira spoke first, her voice thick with emotion. "We forgot. We forgot what we destroyed." She looked at Craventhar. "We didn't just imprison you. We erased what you represented. Power with compassion, strength with mercy. We replaced you with systems and protocols and rules because they were easier to control. They didn't have consciences. They didn't question orders." Jurel stepped forward, and Daniel saw the proud insectoid struggling with words. "You were imprisoned because you had more honor than we did. You refused to murder innocents, and we punished you for it. Because your refusal showed us what we had become." Craventhar stood tall, his scales gleaming in the docking bay lights. "I do not need your apology," he said, his voice resonating through the chamber. "I need you to remember what you forgot. Power without compassion is tyranny. Strength without mercy is cruelty. You had guardians once who understood this. You chose to destroy us rather than listen to our wisdom." The dragon's gaze swept across the assembled council members. "But I am not here for revenge. I am here because these people needed help, and I could give it. That is who I am. That is who I choose to be, no matter what you made me suffer." Cheese raised his head, tears streaming down his reptilian face. "What can we do? How can we make this right?" "You can't," Craventhar said simply. "The past is done. My people are gone. But you can choose to be better going forward. You can remember that the weak deserve protection, that mercy is not weakness, that the measure of civilization isn't how much power you have, but how you choose to use it." Daniel stepped forward to stand beside Craventhar. The dragon glanced down at him with warm amber eyes. "This human awakened something in me I thought was dead," Craventhar said. "Not just fire, not just power, hope, purpose. The memory of who I truly am." He looked back at the council. "If you truly wish to honor what I represent, then grant me this. Create a position. Advocate for the forgotten. Someone who speaks for those the galaxy chooses not to see." Ambassador Zira nodded immediately. "Yes, and you should hold this position." "Not alone," Craventhar said. He placed one massive claw gently on Daniel's shoulder. "This human and I will do it together. One who remembers the past, One who believes in the future. Daniel felt warmth spread through his chest. He looked up at the dragon and smiled. I'd be honored. The council voted unanimously. For the first time in 2 centuries, Kraventhar had a purpose again. And the galaxy had guardians who would remember that power meant nothing without the courage to use it with compassion. Later, as the station settled into calm, Daniel and Kraventhar stood together at an observation window, looking out at the stars. You awakened something in me I thought was gone forever, Kraventhar said quietly. Hope. A belief that one person, acting with kindness, can change the world. Daniel smiled. We all need someone to remind us who we really are. The dragon scales glowed softly in the darkness, a steady warmth that would never fade again. Yes, Kraventhar agreed. We do.